Bava METZIA Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis and Nun Vav Amud Aleph. Positive and negative energy. Ein lo Alav ela Tauromet Part 2. There's a beautiful spot here in Norway where you can stand behind a waterfall and look out at the countryside through the veil of the waterfall. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I was advised to go there, apart from seeing the beautiful sights, to be able to breathe in the negative ions that result from the crashing water at very close proximity. And I realized then once again to what extent we're able to absorb the energy of the environment around us, not just to absorb the physical aspects of the environments that we're around, but also the energetic aspects of the environment in which we operate. We can take in ions, negative ions, we can take in electrical charges from the environment around which we are. And that applies not only to nature, it applies to people. There are people, I'm sure you've experienced it and do experience it often, there are people who radiate positive energy and you can absorb that energy and take it on. And there are people who drain one with negative energy and one can bear that negative energy around. And so it is that we can take on positive energy which charges us and gives us energy, but we can also take on negative energy which pulls us down and holds us back. Sometimes that negative energy is just a passing moment. We interact with somebody very briefly, or we find ourselves in an atmosphere of negative energy for a period of time and we're able to get away from it and no longer experience the effect of it. But there are times where we take on negative energy and it stays with us. We become negatively charged and that pulls us down. That can affect our well-being. It can affect our health. It can affect our prosperity. One example of that is the area of ayin hara, that if one is ostentatious and a person looks at us resentfully, questioning what gives us the right, the entitlement to the good fortune that we might be blessed with, that's a negative energy that we try and protect ourselves from. Tzniut, creating a sense of mystery around one, doesn't cause ayin hara, it doesn't cause resentment and greed and anger. Mystery creates a certain attractiveness, but ostentation does create resentment very often among people who might have a problem with our well-being, with our prosperity. And there are many such examples, and we're going to deal with one of those examples in our piece of Gemara. You'll remember back on Daf Nun Dalet a few days ago, I learned with you a piece of Rabbi Petterburger, and I explained to you that Rabbi Petterburger was one of the great talmidim of Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. Rabbi Yisrael Salanta was one of the greatest people of modern times, as a human being, as a Talmud Chacham, as a Baal Musar, and he really revolutionized the method of learning Musar, of learning spiritual development and personal self-mastery from a Torah perspective. One of his great disciples was Rabbi Petterburger, and I told you that Rabbi Petterburger was the grandfather of my Rosh Yeshiva, and that his mother, it was the Krinike Rebbetzin, was the daughter of the Rabbi Petterburger, and I knew her well. Rabbi Petterburger writes a sefer called Netivot Or, in which he describes his master, his Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, his character, his personality, his style, who he was as a person. And in that, there's a section that we learned where he talks about the fact that if you have forgiven somebody and later on you continue to bear resentment as if you hadn't forgiven them, you're actually robbing them of something you've already given them. You've given them your forgiveness. And to revert back and to start becoming resentful about something that's already history is robbing them of something you've given them. Now, in that same piece of Rabbi Petterburger, he references our Gemara, the opening of the Perek of Talmidim, where we start dealing with employers who are contracting and engaging with prospective employees or contractors, whether they're being paid by the hour or day or whether they're being paid for a job of work, and how misunderstandings can arise in the negotiations between an employer and a prospective employee, and how to manage those misunderstandings. And our Mishnah says that in certain cases, there's no claim. If there's a misunderstanding that has arisen, the employee has no claim on the employer, but ein lahem zalzeh ela taromet. They might have the right, the entitlement to resentment. And Rabbi Petterburger has a problem with that and says, why would the Mishnah tell us they have a right to resentment? What does that concern us? What concerns us is, do they have a legal claim? And if they don't have a legal claim, that's all we need to be concerned with in this Mishnah. Why would the Mishnah say they don't have a legal claim, but they're entitled to be resentful? And my question goes even further than the question as positioned by Rabbi Peterburg, and that is, what is the purpose of this resentment? Not only what is the purpose, but how come they're allowed to have resentment? We just learned in Parashat Kedoshim last Shabbat, Lo tikom velo titoret b'nei amecha. You're not allowed to hold a grudge against the people, your people. And Rashi says, Ve'ezo hinatira, what is bearing a grudge? And he says, Shonoter ha'eiva belibo. He holds on to the resentment and the hatred in his heart. Even though he doesn't act on it, he doesn't take revenge, he doesn't get back at the person, but internally he just holds within himself that anger and that resentment. That's a prohibition of the Torah. We're not allowed to feel that way. And why then in this Mishnah does the Mishnah give the employer or the employee under these circumstances the right to have tauromet, the right to actually be resentful one towards the other? And the idea here is, that there are certain times that you're not allowed to be resentful, but there are certain times where you are allowed to be resentful. But let's go further and let's understand what the purpose of this resentment is. Why would the Mishnah tell us that in this case the employer or the employee who's been unintentionally misled cannot claim anything contractually, but has the right to resentment? What is the value of that right to resentment? To understand the value of the right to resentment, one needs to appreciate the sensitivity towards negative energy. Now, we had a piece of Gemara at the end of the previous parak on Daf Yomi BAVA, where we had a story with Rav Ashi, where the Rabbanon, the rabbis in the academy, said to Rav Ashi that Ravina is meticulous about keeping every rabbinic law that has ever been articulated. He's very, very particular about that. And Rav Ashi wanted to test to what extent that was really true. Shalach le bahadi panya d'male shabta, lishteli mar asara zuzi. So he sent a note to him just before Shabbos one day and said, could you lend me 10 zuz? I have a business opportunity that I would like to take advantage of before Shabbos. Could you quickly lend me 10 zuz? Now we know that there's a law, we learned that when you lend money, you should do so with evidence, with a document or with witnesses, so that you don't cause the possibility of the other person even thinking for a moment that he might have the opportunity to renege on the deal or to deny that there ever was a loan. So he sends a message back. Ravina sends the message back and says, sure, I'll lend you the money, but just please send some witnesses to see it. So Rav Ashi wrote to Ravina and said, are you serious? You want witnesses even for me? You and I have this kind of relationship, and you know the kind of integrity that I've always lived by, and you require witnesses for this small little transaction? And he sends back and he says, even more so, because I'm lending money to a person of your stature. Because your mind is occupied in learning and teaching Torah. And it's very possible that mishtili, that you're going to forget about this debt, and I will have to remind you. And you might deny it and say, I just don't remember what you're talking about. And when people hear that I'm pressing you for a debt that you deny, they know that you're a righteous person, and if you deny it, you probably never borrowed it, and they will curse me in their hearts. And I don't need that. So there we have an example of Ravina saying, I don't want the negativity of people cursing me, even though it's unjustified. I've done nothing wrong. I lent you the money and I'm asking for the money back. But people might misunderstand that, and in their misunderstanding, they might wish ill of me, and I don't need that negative energy. That's another example, like Ayin Hara, where we need to try and avoid that negative energy. It doesn't matter whether we're right or wrong. We can be self-righteous and say, I've done nothing wrong. Who cares what people think of me? No, we do care what people think of us. We care what people think of us when there's some kind of a basis to it. And here, although in this particular case, Ravina has lent the money to Rav Ashi, and if Rav Ashi denies it, Rav Ashi is in the wrong. But because Ravina didn't fulfill the law of lending with evidence, of lending with witnesses or with a document, since he didn't fulfill that rabbinic, or would not have fulfilled that rabbinic law, there would be some justification to people feeling resentful, feeling angry, and holding a curse in their hearts towards him. And that negative energy, of course, it doesn't mean that people would walk around the streets cursing Ravina. That's not what he's afraid of. It's just in their hearts, that thought that there are people around who wish me harm, who wish me ill, who think badly and negatively of me. And it's because of something I did and should not have done, although I've done nothing dishonest at all. Nevertheless, that negative energy is something I don't need to carry around. Just as at the waterfall one can absorb the negative ions, which means positive energy, so we can absorb the negative energy of other people, and that can stay with us, and that can bring us down, and that can harm us. And so when it comes to tauromet, to resentment, if somebody resents me for no reason whatever, they're just jealous of me, whatever it is, if somebody resents me, I don't have to do anything about that. I don't have to protect myself against that negative energy. I can just keep my distance from those people, and that negative energy isn't going to affect me. But there are situations where, although another person has no legal claim on me, there is a basis to their resentment. I can understand their resentment. Somebody was negotiating with me and with good intention, and there was a misunderstanding from their perspective, from the way they see it. They feel exploited. From the way they see it, they feel taken advantage of, although that wasn't my intention and I didn't do anything to take advantage of them. I can understand that perspective. In a situation where they're allowed to have tauromet, they're allowed to have resentment. What is the value of that resentment? The value is that if I'm a person who tries to avoid negative energy, I will want to mediate that resentment. I will want to attend to it. I will want to speak to that person and explain to them. I might want to compensate that person somewhat for what they believe they're entitled to, even though legally they don't have a leg to stand on. Legally, I don't owe them anything. But in order to insulate myself and protect myself from negative energy, sometimes I'll make a concession. And whether it's an apology, and whether the concession is by way of sincere apology, or the concession is financial, or an act of kindness, an act of chesed, I will do something to remove that negative energy. That's the value of having the right, ein lahem ze al ze ela tauromet, that they have the right to resentment. That means, and therefore the other party has the obligation, just a moral obligation, not a legal obligation, to do something about that resentment, to address that resentment, not to ignore that resentment, so as to remove that negativity from their interactions. And that's something that we need to be so aware of, our capacity to be influenced by the energy around us, our capacity to take on the energy around us. And again, that applies not only to the energy that is projected towards us, but we project energy to the people around us. We can project energy of generosity, of good wishes for people, of wanting the best for people, whether they're people who are more fortunate than us or they're people who are less fortunate than us. Just wishing them well and wanting them good, that's projecting good energy. Having a tefillah, having a prayer for somebody, giving somebody a bracha, giving somebody a blessing, whether verbally or emotionally, just giving somebody a sense of, I wish you well, I want you to do well. That emits positive energy, and the other person is able to absorb that positive energy. And sometimes if we look at people with a meanness, if we look at people with some kind of resentment, we're putting out negative energy. Each of us is a generator of energy, or a consumer of energy. At any given moment, we are generating positive energy, or we are taking energy out of the world, taking energy away from other people, and resulting in a net negativity of energy. How valuable it is to be able to build our resources, our reservoirs of positive energy, and to do everything we can to overflow with that positive energy and to transmit and project that positive energy onto the people around us, so they too can benefit from our positivity.